All right, now we call on Joanne MacDonald to make the next presentation, please.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just going to, if I could have your attention, just going to start off by saying that every year I say this about how important it is to hear the stories of the individual people who are being honored. And boy, have I got a story for you tonight. And it took me a little while to get Doris nominated on this committee. I'm surrounded by testosterone. So I don't think they realized, but they do now, the importance of what she has done for this community. So I'm going to take you through her story. Doris has told me that she does not want to talk when it's done, so she figures I can do enough talking for the both of us. I'm just going to start before I begin. Frank Corbett received an email from Laura Lee Langley, who's a former host of Live at 5. She was a student with Doris from age 5 to 22, and she sent an email to Frank, and she wanted it read. Frank, I spoke to Doris earlier today, and I could hear in her voice how happy she is to receive this recognition. I would like to share with you how instrumental Doris MacDonald was in shaping so many of us young girls, and indeed a few brave young men, as we were growing up in Cape Breton. Doris gave us all an opportunity to shine in our own way. She taught us discipline, we gained poise, we had to be athletic, try doing some of those tap routines over and over again. And most of all, we learned to respect one another. Often our work was to be synchronized with one another as part of a team on the stage or in a competition. We learned how important it was to have each other's back, to celebrate together when we did well, and to hold up each other when we weren't doing so well. Doris helped us all grow up together in small communities across Cape Breton. I have lifelong friends from those years, and the memories and lessons have stayed with me. Doris MacDonald is an icon. I am so proud of her as she receives this well-deserved recognition. I hope she realizes the impact she has had on so many. Tonight, I am deeply honored to present to you the story of a lady who is certainly no stranger to any of us. Doris MacDonald is a gifted athlete in a sport that demands total concentration and coordination. She is also a builder in that she has invested an incredible 74 years of her life, 8 in England and 66 in Cape Breton, into teaching dance and fostering the self-worth and success of literally thousands of Cape Breton children. Doris actually only realized that she had reached a milestone of sorts when some of her students began telling her she had taught their grandmothers. Dance is the very definition of sport, an activity involving physical exertion in which an individual or team competes against other or others for entertainment. Dance is both physically and mentally exhausting, as well as exhilarating and uplifting. Dance is also an art, the most basic of all rhythms, where you can tell a story without speaking. I remember as a child attending her recitals at Calvin Hall, and every year at the end of the recital, up until she was 80, Doris would glide across the stage in her costume, performing a ballet totally on tiptoe, tall and slender. I thought she was the most elegant person I ever saw. This, then, is her story of how she survived as a child in war-torn Europe, to her successful business partnership and love affair with her husband, Alan. Doris Thomas was born June 25, 1922, in North London. She started taking dance instruction around 3 years of age, and by the time she was 6, she was taking the bus by herself across the city to the dance studio. Only once a month were parents allowed in to watch the dance sessions. This would not sit well with today's helicopter parents. She was teaching her own classes there by age 16 and continued doing so for 8 years. She lived her whole life up to this point in the City of London, where the arts and theatre were considered an essential part of life. Her family spent every Friday evening going to live theatre in London. Doris finished her high school years during the start of World War II, and she has vivid memories of living through Hitler's Blitz of London. Everyone went down into their basements at night in complete darkness and listened to the German airplanes flying overhead and the whistles of the bombs dropping. Many Londoners at this time preferred to sleep in the underground subway stations, and passengers would have to walk among the sleeping civilians to get out of the subway. Doris would often, as a teenager, take her young dancers to the shelters to entertain before the air raid sirens went off. The British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, was determined that the war would not destroy the fabric of English society. He encouraged everybody to just go about business as usual. In fact, when Parliament asked him to cut funding for the arts in order to increase military spending, he replied incredulously, "Then what are we fighting for?" Doris told me a story about walking to school every morning, past houses that were reduced to rubble, and hearing people cry for help. But everyone was warned not to rush in, as there may be unexploded bombs in the area. Instead, they were issued whistles to blow, which would alert the bomb squads and rescue units where to go. Just imagine having to go to school and concentrate on your studies after that. Doris's favorite expression is, "We Brits are tough," and I fully believe this. Doris was 17 when war broke out and 19 when she joined the RAF, or the Royal Air Force. She was an instrument technician, and she said that before she could sign off on any of her instrumentation, she always had a sergeant double-check her gauges. Then, once the gauges were installed in the planes, the technician who had assembled them was compelled to go up in the plane for the first flight check. Personally, I can think of no better system for quality assurance. Doris was in the RAF for 3 years when she met a handsome Canadian soldier named Doris MacDonald, who was stationed in a coastal English town. Unbeknownst to him, they were preparing for the D-Day invasion. Doris met him while visiting her aunt, and they began writing to each other until he was sent across the channel to the beaches of Normandy. Before he went, he mailed all of his personal effects to her mother in London, and Doris didn't know at that point if he was alive or dead. Alan had actually been shot in the head and lay on the beach for 5 hours until it was safe for his troops to collect him. Miraculously, his helmet had taken the brunt of the shot, and he was brought back to a hospital in England where he contacted Doris again before he was sent back into active conflict. He came back to visit her on every leave, and they continued this romance until they were able to marry in London after the war in January of 1946. Alan was very soon transferred back to Canada, and Doris never saw him again until he picked her up at Pier 21 in Halifax in September of 1946. Alan had not misled her about what life would be like in a sleepy Cape Breton coal mining town when compared to the hustle and bustle of London. It was a big cultural change, she admits, and she really missed the theatres of London. Although Waterford was quite small and very dirty, with virtually no paved streets, Doris was struck by the kindness and friendliness of the people here, and she was flabbergasted by the small town culture, where virtually everybody knew everybody else. She was determined to use her dance skills to bring some form of culture to her new home. Within a month, she started her first dancing classes at the Legion. The classes were small at first, but as demand grew, she gradually expanded to Glace Bay, Sydney, and North Sydney. She immediately saw the potential for a business here, doing something she genuinely loved. In 2008, Doris was inducted into the Cape Breton Business Hall of Fame, where they said, "MacDonald has spawned a whole cultural industry on this island, and in the process has fostered the self-worth and success of literally tens of thousands of Cape Bretoners through dance." Initially, each family was responsible for their own costumes. Doris tried to keep the themes as simple as possible to keep the costs down. She said Alan helped her store and label the costumes for reuse, as well as repairing and recycling the tap shoes to children who could not afford new ones. One thing Doris hated about the move to New Waterford was Alan's return to the coal mine. She was totally unused to this way of life and was determined that her new business would provide a living for both of them. By 1951, a mere 5 years after she started, Alan was able to quit the pit, and they became partners in every sense of the word. Alan did all the bookkeeping, looked after all the equipment, as well as transporting it to each site. He was her light and sound technician and put all the taps on the children's shoes. He also, as he put it, tied 1,000,000 shoelaces over the years. Most importantly, Alan was her faithful chauffeur for 60 years, driving her around in some pretty horrible weather. The children had to work very hard to prepare for recitals, as well as for their dance exams at the end of each year. Initially, there were no certified dance judges in Nova Scotia, but that didn't stop Doris. So she invited 2 judges to come over from England every year. They stayed at her house until over time dancers in Nova Scotia became qualified to judge. Each town had their own recital, meaning she was putting on 4 a year, as well as preparing the children for their dance exams. Through Doris's efforts, all the children were certified through the Canadian Dance Teachers Association every year in tap, ballet, modern jazz, and acrobatics. Every year, Doris and Alan hired a bus to head to the major competition in Halifax, and many parents took their own cars as well. In later years, Doris said that the girls who passed certain dance exams in Halifax actually got credit for them in university as art electives. After the recitals in June, you would think Doris would look forward to the summers off, but no. She was often invited by various recreation departments across the province to put on 1 or 2 week dance workshops. This would often take up to 4 to 6 weeks of her time off. Her schedule during the year was brutal by any standards. All of her classes during the week were held after school and well into the evenings. So I'm going to say this is why Doris has a lifelong habit of staying up late at night and sleeping late in the morning. Mondays she taught in New Waterford. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday evenings were in Sydney. Thursdays in Glace Bay, and all of Saturday was spent on the north side. In addition, on Friday afternoons, she taught kinder dancing at the Y in Sydney and for the Busy Bees daycare, which was part of the Montessori school at the time. And every Friday evening, she and Alan taught ballroom dancing to thousands of adults. For over 60 years, she worked full tilt, 6 days a week, all the while maintaining contact with her Legion work, as well as her contact with the war brides. In the years after the war, Doris would often be asked to take her dancers to local nursing homes, where she would always see veterans with nerve damage from gas warfare or those with amputations. She never forgot them, and she and Alan always found the time every fall to make it their mission to ensure that people would not forget the veterans' contributions to their freedom. Doris and Alan started visiting schools in the local area as early as 1947, and every year the number of requests for them to speak mounted. They never refused. Doris remembers that on one given day, they both visited 5 schools, 2 nursing homes, and 5 service clubs, in addition to the dance schedule they strictly maintained. In case you think she couldn't possibly do more, have I mentioned her qualifications and recertifications? In England, there were 3 steps to becoming a dance instructor. First, an associate, which she likened to a BA. Second, a member, which she likened to a BEd. And third, a fellowship, which was the equivalent of a PhD in dance. Also included in each program was a course in child psychology, which Doris always told me with a wink that it works on adults as well. I always wondered if she was psychoanalyzing me. Doris and Alan went to England to visit her family every 2nd year, and she always took her refresher courses then, as well as any new courses that were available. She and Alan would also recertify in ballroom dancing while they were there. Now, this is their vacation, remember. In addition, every summer for 3 years, she went to New York City to take her ballroom instructor's course at the Fred Astaire School of Dance. Eventually, she became certified to teach all areas of dance in Canada, England, and the US. Every vacation was a working one for Doris. Doris told me that she hadn't always planned to carry on with the dance school. She had planned that once their family came, she would just stay home and raise the children. But sadly, their family never happened, so she says we enjoyed everyone else's children instead. Although greatly disappointed, Doris and Alan shrugged off the loss and embraced all of the children who went through their dance school. And believe me, the children felt the love. I found a quote online by a former dancer who said, "I spent many years dancing with Doris MacDonald dancers from 1976 to 1988, and they were some of the best years of my life. Doris was the most understanding woman you would ever meet. She not only taught, she cared, and most of all, she loved." Doris's influence in the field of dance was felt province-wide, as many of her former students have opened their own schools of dance. One in particular, I know Susan Gallup is just celebrating her 50th anniversary as a dance instructor. She's a former student of Doris's. They opened their own school of dance, fitness gyms, and have become personal trainers to meet the demands of a growing fitness industry. Her dance academy offered a wonderful alternative for children who might otherwise be left out of the more traditional sports. The majority of dance schools in Nova Scotia today have teachers who can trace their origins back to the Doris MacDonald dancers. Last paragraph. 2006 was a monumental year for Doris. In January, she celebrated 60 years of marriage to her life partner, Alan. In October, she celebrated the 60th anniversary of her dance academy, and sadly, in November, she lost Alan, the love of her life, to cancer. One would think that at 84, Doris would be totally lost at that point, but no. Doris was not done yet. A former pupil, Denise Jardine, purchased half of her business, and they became partners. 6 years later, in 2012, when she turned 90, Doris finally sold the business outright to Denise, who continues to operate it under the name D&R Dancers. Doris is still active with the local Legion, which was renamed for her husband after he died, and she also meets for weekly lunches with the local war brides, although the numbers have dwindled greatly over the years. At 96, sorry Doris, Doris still watches the world news avidly, and if you ever want to visit her and strike up a conversation, just say, "What do you think of Donald Trump?" And you're off. And so she still watches the world news avidly and is keenly aware of current affairs. Sadly, she told me that it's very difficult for her to watch everything that they fought so hard to save so many years ago unraveling today. She tells me the pot is boiling. It has been my extreme pleasure these past few months to reconnect with my old neighbor Doris and to present her story to you tonight. Please welcome this incredible woman as we proudly induct her into the New Waterford and District Sports Heritage Hall of Fame.
Picture right there.